Ultrakill is a small indie game I was shown by a friend of mine ages ago, before it had even entered its early access release on Steam, and all that existed at the time was a short demo you could find online containing the first 5 stages. But despite this, his rave review quickly gained my interest, so a bit after Act 1 of the main story had released, I decided to give it a look, and I found one of the most promising early access titles I've ever played. Ultrakill, for those who don't know, is a fast-paced, stylish, first-person movement shooter which excels with its brilliant gunplay and moment-to-moment gameplay. So let's just start with the gunplay. Ultrakill is a very mechanically dense game, especially in terms of weapons and their usage, leading to constant experimentation, yet at no point does it leave you necessarily overwhelmed or lost for what to do or use. If you want to stick to what's simple, you can, but at the same time, if you choose to, you may employ all the diverse options that are available to you, and naturally you'll be rewarded handsomely for doing so, as almost anything you can think up will work like a charm, so it's always satisfying to use all manner of tools at your disposal. I'll demonstrate this using the Marksman Revolver as my example, a relatively simple but pretty fun weapon on the surface, having the same primary fire as your basic pistol, but instead of shooting a laser as its secondary, instead gives the player the ability to flip coins into the air, which can be shot as they fly to ricochet bullets into enemies, for better positioning or more damage, and of course, these mechanics are quite simple. So firstly, the coin has a few states. When initially thrown, there's a general state in which when the coin is shot, it will deflect and hit an enemy close to where the coin was when the shot connected. But when thrown, the coin will flash after some time during falling the scene, where, when shot during this time, will have a special attribute. But, jokes aside, this weapon can be used effectively by simply using the coins to hit enemies that are challenging to steadily aim at or to hit weak points easier, but this is only a very surface level usage of this ability. Firstly, as mentioned, the coins have a few states, and put simply, if hit at certain times cause special effects depending on the type of revolver equipped, these being a split shot to hit multiple enemies or a stronger piercing beam, and this already heavily diversifies your options. However, the coins don't explicitly have to ricochet revolver bullets, they can deflect all manner of hit-scan projectiles, which multiple of your weapons possess, and if used correctly can be extremely powerful. When knowing this, you may quickly gravitate to the piercing shot of the other revolver, as you can ricochet this off a coin, strengthening it significantly, but alternatively, the electric or malicious rail cannon can also be fired into the coin, creating an interesting dynamic of risk and reward, as these guns must charge to shoot a powerful burst, and if done correctly can increase the damage drastically, which can be critical in boss fights, but if you miss, you can be left without them for a significant period of time. And this only scratches the surface of the hidden depth of Ultrakill's mechanics, and I didn't even cover some of the more complex stuff like coin juggling, mainly because I don't fully understand how it quite works. But Ultrakill's combat doesn't just end there. You also have access to whatever environment is present, and each and every single set piece has its own unique identity, promoting different interaction not only from you, the player, but from the enemies, or even a new usage of mechanics, which always keeps it fresh and interesting, even on subsequent playthroughs, making stages never really quite feel the same, with each stage having numerous arenas that are created to perfectly accommodate the fast-paced movement and gunplay, or restrict you against oppressive foes to make the battle all the more tense. But one of the other main mechanics of note is that, and upon losing health, the only way to recover it is to take in the blood of your enemies, which explodes out when damaging them with your fists or guns, but of course you actually must be close enough to collect it. This creates an interesting dynamic, as you can't be too distant from your opponent, as this will give you less opportunity to siphon blood to heal whilst in the midst of battle. But, of course, you don't want to be too close either, because you may be in range of some devastating blows, which is flawlessly complemented by the Now, the enemies in Ultrakill are also far from your typical fare for a first-person shooter, as they aren't afraid to rush you down and deal massive chunks of damage to you, as opposed to just being long-range bullet fodder. So here's a quick rundown of all of Act 1's main set of enemies. First up are the Filth, and they're your basic grunt enemies, and they'll chase you down on the ground and lunge at you when in range, and are typically found in large groups, and whilst they're quite weak, it can hurt real bad if multiple catch you off guard. Strays are your common long-range attackers that stay perched up away from the player and will shoot projectiles periodically, and when approached will flee, causing them to catch you off guard during combat with other enemies. And like most projectiles, theirs can be parried as a defense to create a small explosion on impact. Schisms are tankier projectile-based enemies that shoot in horizontal and vertical waves towards the player, and similarly to the Stray, add pressure to combat situations with other enemies, but aren't particularly threatening on their own. Soldiers act almost as a powered up version of the Stray, shooting in shotgun bursts as opposed to single volleys, and this can restrict your movement in the air as to not get hit, and similarly position away from the player just like the Stray, but dissimilarly when approached they will instead uppercut you as opposed to flee. Drones are quick flying enemies that zip around causing them to quickly avoid you, but are extremely fragile, and upon death they will attempt to kamikaze, causing a small explosion in their wake. Stray cleaners are like filth on steroids, wielding powerful and unparryable flamethrowers which will destroy your health quickly and are extremely tanky, so they're best taken care of by hitting their weak spot. Additionally, they will also dodge attacks, especially more powerful strikes, sometimes to questionable effectiveness. Malicious faces act as the first of many stronger enemies, remaining mainly stationary, but have high health to compensate for this, shooting many bullets with frightening accuracy, and will shoot explosive lasers around in an attempt to box you in. In addition, in violent difficulty, they will become enraged when reaching half health, increasing the speed of their attacks significantly. Samurai act as a more grounded and physically offensive version of the malicious face, while similarly throwing explosives for wide area damage as opposed to shooting you with many projectiles will shoulder bash the player when in range, sending the player far across the room. If farther out, they'll send out a shockwave by stomping their foot on the ground, sending the player in the air. And finally, the mind flayers, which are fucking assholes. And they're apparently female, which has made quite a few people interested in their, design.
Hey, sorry to bother you, but, did you see a machine run through here by chance? I don't know.
And all of these enemies build off each other so flawlessly, incentivizing the player to attempt to find new strategies for dealing with encounters effectively, as you're always put into a new position as new and tougher foes are introduced, on top of the former cast of enemies. A new enemy will obliterate you the first time around and feel like it's the most difficult thing yet before you're told, this guy, he's now your next door neighbor and he's going to be sticking around from now on. But to every foe there are numerous countermeasures, and finding new little tricks is one of my personal favourite parts of Ultrakill, and this helps you deal with the tougher enemies later down the line as you get used to the pressure they apply and you see your strategies evolve as you become more acquainted with the systems in place. It's nothing short of amazing. Like, did you know that when you're using the screwdriver variant of the rail cannon it prevents mind flayers from teleporting? And almost every foe has little quirks like this, and it may be something that you never even thought to use before. And each and every one builds off each other to create a setting which is difficult but never feels particularly impossible or overly frustrating. And these qualities are no better exemplified than by the bosses of Ultrakill. On my first playthrough I died to each of Act 1's bosses several times. In violent difficulty they are immensely difficult for the point in the game, but aren't frustrating, and the challenge causes them to be immensely satisfying to beat, amongst finding other strategies for facing them. I won't say much more on this because if you haven't played Ultrakill, they're a treat to behold, but I couldn't go without mentioning them at least once. They're some of my favourite boss fights I've ever played, but we still haven't got to everyone's favourite part of Ultrakill, which is naturally the...
That's by far I'm talking about. This is the best part right here. I've told you guys this before. Absolute perfection. This is my favorite part. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is the best part. This right here, stop talking, this is the best part. Absolute perfection. Nice.
Now we're here. The bread and butter. The stuff that, if you've heard of Ultrakill before now, this is probably what you've heard of. The movement in Ultrakill is some of the most fast-paced and intuitive you can find. Ultrakill has been refined to almost perfection, with each and every piece of movement having its own unique purpose, but with all this variety it maintains to still feel slick and seamless to execute. And much like the weapons, is highly adaptable, and you'll always find something new to toy around with, even being able to use your weapons themselves to complement movement around the stage. It can be something as simple as the dash, allowing you to be impervious or reposition yourself, or something as niche as sliding on top of water, skipping across its surface like the world's most destructive pebble. These all culminate to give a level of control that never really leaves you feeling cheated, and all the versatility of your movement almost always gives you an option out of a sticky situation. At almost every turn where I met my demise, I never felt like I was cheated, and instead almost immediately recognized how I could have escaped, which often left me thinking, okay, this time I've got it. making each death not feel angering despite how harsh Ultrakill can be at times, making me more angry at myself for messing up than I am at the game, which is very important for a game like this. And as mentioned before, the environments you are placed in support this ease of movement so naturally. Oh wait, that reminds me, I still need to talk about the... Now, I'd like to preface this section with the fact that I'm no game designer, nor am I an artist by any means, but these are just a few of my, opinions on these elements, as this is one of my personal favourite elements of Ultrakill. Stages are always typically unified under the layer they appear, and their setting is also dictated by this, with each layer being named in reference to Dante's Inferno, and each layer is always extremely visually distinct from the last, and even within a single layer, stage can vary drastically while still feeling thematically appropriate for where they appear. And this is assisted by the thought that the player is descending deeper and deeper into hell on your murderous onslaught, giving you a feeling that as you go deeper it gets darker and more warped, as at some point you may be exploring these grey steel corridors only to arrive at the next layer in which the world is surrounded by screens, and within that very layer you're brought to this ominous cathedral for the boss encounter. And this is where you'll probably find some of the first world building, both subtle and not so subtle. You can even play catch the law with the books here. And Ultrakill constantly switches the setting on you, allowing each and every stage to be special and unique in their own regard, and immensely enjoyable even on numerous playthroughs. And within the stages themselves, there's so much variety, each having typically their own music and mechanics to toy around with that are fun, but not intrusive as to not break the core gameplay, as slowly you're introduced to more permanent mechanic, things like skulls that act like keys to doors. And, who are you looking at? Anyways, each and every stage is meticulously designed this way, but these stages are also full of many smaller details that take a more observant player to notice, that while superfluous to the gameplay, add an extra layer of life to this ironically dead hellscape. For example, you can find these speakers in stage 1 of Limbo, and when shot the ambience of birds will be cut off with the harsh crackling of electricity from the now broken speaker, as this stage is all about the context of a fake world, and this ambience adds just an extra layer to the immersion. But an extra layer of detail is always added here, which is, in part, what makes Ultrakill so special, and even now when I go through stages I find little things like this all over the place. Each and every stage has numerous secrets to uncover within, 5 spirit orbs in each level that can be hints to other secrets within, give you power-ups, or just a simple reward for an eagle-eyed player, and they're a blast to search for, as they're usually hidden really well, and at times I've even had to search for upwards of half an hour just to find the single one I'm missing. Not to mention challenges for each and every level that really at times make you think outside the box, applying creative use of the tools at your disposal, or simply a fun and tough challenge to overcome. And finally, the secret levels, in which there is one for each and every layer, which I won't show you too much here, but the general gist is that they're typically a reference to or a parody of another game or genre, and all of these are a blast, and each have a crazy amount of effort poured into them. On a more visual aspect, the retro aesthetic is akin to Quake in similar games of old, but adds a modern element as to separate itself a little more than a game like Dusk, and funnily enough, the game actually gives you the option to downgrade the graphics to a ridiculous extent. Hi, Future Frost here. I didn't actually mention why, but the reason why it's like this is so you can make the visuals more akin to the games of old that I just mentioned. But one of my favourites is the fact that you can set the game to a glamorous 36p. This is genuinely painful to play with, and oh, you can't see enemies if they're farther than 5 meters away from you. And the game is full of funny little things like this, and my god, have I not even talked about the... Each and every stage has this amazing theme to, well, set the stage, if you will, for the upcoming level, only breaking in once those red doors open. Or even a bit later for a more dramatic introduction. And this ain't your granddad's soundtrack, okay? You don't want to put him into cardiac arrest. Because each and every one of them are fast-paced and intense bops which you've mostly been hearing throughout the video in order to fit the gameplay, and most of the songs or stages are adaptable, each having both an in-combat an out-of-combat version. except for boss stages where bosses will have their own themes. And typically, once combat is initiated, songs will become more intense with heavier sounds to further engross you. These are the kind of cues you bob your head to without even thinking, so each and every one of them are great in their own right. The only times that these songs aren't intense is when you have this gloomy build-up to a boss or stage, which gives you a temporary respite before being, again, flung into the chaos. And out of every single song currently in Ultrakill, there's only one that I would say I'm not particularly fond of, and the song plays in 3 rooms of 1 level and is literally called A Complete and Utter Destruction of the Senses. So I feel as if they still got what they were going for. But now, let's get to the scary stuff. I'm talking about the... Now, this game is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but every game has its flaws, and take what I'm about to say with a little grain of salt, as some of these are my personal preference or opinion, but that being said, I do have about 60 hours in a game that you can complete its current campaign in a cheeky 3.5. First of all, the style system, and whilst it's very fun, rewarding, and at times difficult to get a high style rating, I believe it's still a little too easy to get the penultimate rating, being that of the Ultrakill rating, as most times I get this by simply shooting a malicious rail command shot into a group of filth, or similarly weak creatures, skyrocketing my score. Which is fun, don't get me wrong, but at times it can feel as if it undermines the complexity of the weapon mechanics explained prior, when you can take such a simplistic approach for a similar or greater effect than an effective use of combining innate aspects of weapons, deterring me from using this sort of thing. There are systems in place to counter this, like a fresh weapon bonus or things like that, and I don't think you should need to use these sorts of things, but it would be nice if it, benefited you more. But I'm far more inclined when facing a boss or mini-boss, as these strong enemies are where this system really shines, employing a more creative approach, which I wish was true for more of the game, which is not necessarily to say it should be less powerful, as it does take a charge of the rail cannon to pull off, and typically only defeats the squishiest of enemies, but I personally don't believe something like this should give us much score, as this acts as an all-in-one solution and makes getting high score trivial for most stages. But this may change with higher difficulties that are to be added later, and of course you could argue you could just not use it, but I shouldn't have to avoid a part of my kit that's fun to use just due to it being too strong in this singular aspect. Secondly, this isn't so much a gripe or issue with the game itself, but the game currently only has a very small team at the time of recording this, and whilst the updates are amazing and refined when the game releases new content, it releases it at a crawl, to say the least. So if you purchase it or are waiting until it's fully finished, it may take a little bit. Oh, also, as this is an early access game and is quite early in development, some things aren't yet implemented. Also, I feel as if the prelude of the game, which acts as the introduction and, well, the prelude to not only Act 1 but the entire game itself, doesn't quite shine as brightly as the rest of the game, in my opinion, of course. As whilst these stages are an absolute blast to play through like all the others, they're still introducing the mechanics and as such forgo the creativity in the environment and set pieces. Not completely, mind you, I love these stages, but later stages have this sort of thing in spades, instead taking place in these dark, dingy hallways with many rooms being much less open and dynamic. Of course still having flair, and it's all still heavily stylized, but don't differentiate from each other as much as future stages do from each other, allowing them to blend together in one's mind. Even after playing all these stages numerous times, I'm not sure if I could tell you which one of these stages out of the 5 this screenshot was taken. Conversely, I could tell you where this screenshot came from, which is from a later section in the game, which becomes a little bit of an issue, as this is where the demo takes place, and this may unfortunately deter some people, as the game doesn't delve into the wild creativity until later. And yeah, I get it, I am kinda grasping at straws with this one, but if nothing else, this should just be an attestation to how good this game truly is. Because out of everything that I said, my main criticism would truly be just that there isn't more of the game yet. At the time of recording this, Ultrakill has a 99.2% positive rating on Steam, out of the over 21,000 reviews. And if that can't sway you even a little on top of all that I've already had to say, I don't know what else to tell you. And out of all these reviews, less than 200 of them are negative. Not to mention a large portion of these negative reviews are simply just dumb jokes, and many of them are just asking for sex to be added. Well, needless to say, if you're looking for that kind of experience, unfortunately, Ultrakill may not be for you. Or is it?
Are you looking at this?
Also, to reiterate from before, just because you can beat the game in 3.5 hours doesn't mean it doesn't have very much content, but for those who just want to blast right through it as opposed to get everything, then this might be one you want to hold off on. I've played so much of this game because I perfect every level, find all the secrets, find the secret levels, do all the challenges, play way too much of the endless mode, and toy around with the sandbox. So after watching this whole video, why not try the demo? It's free. And that's a great price. On that note, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.